nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. This meeting is being live streamed by Chelmsford Telemedia and posted to the Chelmsford Public Schools website for interested community members to access and watch. In-person public participation will be taking place tonight in accordance with the Chelmsford School Committee Public Participation Guidelines. Anyone speaking tonight during the public input portion of the meeting has notified the superintendent's office of their desire to speak and has been provided with these guidelines. Upon request, written comments received no later than 12 p.m. on the day of this meeting will also be read and made a part of the record of the meeting during the second public comment session. There are no members of the press present, so welcome everybody to tonight's meeting. Our first order of business is to approve the minutes from our meeting on July 18th.
I make a motion to approve the minutes from July 18th school committee meeting as presented.
I'll second.
Does anybody have any corrections? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Against, abstaining, 2, 3 in favor, 2 abstaining. Thank you. We don't have our Chelmsford High representatives.
They'll
So-
start back in September.
All right, I'm looking forward to seeing them, and do we have any good news?
Just good news in general. If you haven't had a chance to go onto the website, there's some great articles. One on Christina Mitza, who is the new dean of Hawthorne House at Chelmsford High School, and one on Josh Flagg, the former dean of Hawthorne House at Chelmsford High School, but he is now the principal of Parker Middle School. So if you haven't had a chance to read about them, I encourage you to go on the website, and then in the next few weeks, just to keep an eye on the website for additional information that's going to be coming out about the start of school.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I just read this 2 hours ago that I guess the legislature yesterday approved free lunches for going forward.
Yes, yeah, I was gonna find
Yeah,
that
so
too.
that's,
Wait.
That is
Wait,
good
Linda
news.
has something?
Yeah, we're gonna have to bring that up as a discussion point, because Joanna, if you wouldn't mind explaining a
Okay.
little bit more, just so that we're clear that it's not.
So the governor has 10 days to approve the budget as presented or give line item vetoes. So as of today, it's not known. So we just have to be a little more patient and see if the governor's next steps within 10 days. Okay?
So we'll put that on for 14 days from now.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So-
No, but I did hear she was most likely going to sign it. So.
Yes.
We'll all remain optimistic.
Yes.
It's
will
very
happen.
clear that it's not guaranteed right now as of today.
Yes.
I'm an optimist.
You are, and I think that's great. I just wanted to make sure we didn't put out the wrong information and people would then be sideswiped in 10 days.
It's
All right,
great.
so we are, does anybody else have any good news? I'm sorry. Right, so we're to our first public input session. I don't believe anybody contacted us that wishes to speak, and we have no one here. So we'll move on to new business.
Yep. So moving on to new business, we have Shannon Bischoff here. She's our department coordinator of social emotional learning and school counseling. And she's here to give us an update on two of our programs, Care Solace. We moved to Care Solace this past year, and Cartwheel, and to talk a little bit about the usage and answer any questions you have. So Shannon, I'm going to turn it over to you. You have the clicker. If something goes wrong, I will click for you.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me, everyone, and hello to families at home. Happy summer to all of you. I am going to talk a little bit about Care Solace and Cartwheel, two different counseling and mental health resources that we use in the district to respond to the needs of our families, our students, and our faculty and staff. Care Solace is the first resource. We've had this in place for about a year and a half. You might remember that we brought it on board a year ago, March, when we were in desperate need of a referral resource because College William James had shut down the resource that we had been using for many years. So temporarily. So we researched, we found this new resource, Care Solace. The feedback from students, from families, from staff has been wonderful. A couple of differences between William James and Care Solace is that it is available 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and 365 days of the year. We are finding, based upon the data that Carousel shares with us, that families are utilizing the referral resource from 7 in the morning till 11 at night. So when it's most convenient for families, very accessible. The other difference is that it's multilingual, meaning that they have care coordinators that speak multiple languages, as well as the ability to translate into multiple different languages to respond to the needs of families. So we love the inclusivity of it. The response time is approximately 10 to 15 minutes. I put 20 because that's what's on their website, but they're very, very responsive in terms of when they receive a referral, either from one of our staff members, from a family member, or through their portal. So let me see. A couple different things about Care Solace. Is that there's 3 different avenues for families in Chelmsford to access them. They can either be referred from a staff member, that would be one of our psychologists, one of our counselors, one of our administrators, or one of our counselors. And then the other way that families can access is that they can self-refer. They can go on the portal. We have a specific Chelmsford URL that they can access. It's on our website. Our principals share it out in their weekly newsletter. I know Linda shares it out in our district newsletter. So they can go on and self-refer. The other way that families can access is anonymously if they prefer not to be identified on our dashboard. A couple of benefits of the dashboard that Care Solace provides is that we know when a family has accessed support services. As you know, the mental health system is on overload right now, responding to the needs of children and families, and there's wait lists. So the dashboard provides minute-to-minute information for us to know when a family or a child has been placed in care. So that will prompt us, if it's been a little bit of time, that we're going to be doing monitoring and check-ins with that family, and our school staff will be available to those families. The other thing I just want to mention is that our faculty and staff have access to use this support service, not only for themselves, but for any family members. I personally have used it to refer a family member. I know other faculty around the district that have used it to refer for counseling and mental health support services. When a staff or faculty accesses Care Solace, that does not go on our dashboard. It is completely anonymous. So there's no way of identifying what a faculty is referred. So lots of really, really positive things about this support service. A little bit about our data for the year. This shows just the year in a glance from July to June. As you can see, the bulk of the referrals do come from our staff, our trained staff. But then a close second is anonymous searches, where families or even our adolescents can access it themselves, and then family-initiated cases. We have approximately, on average, 30 to 40 cases referred in our district per month, and that is in the blue on the screen. And as you can see, it's also available to families to access throughout the summer.
Shannon, can I just ask a quick question?
Yes.
We use this, so this is used not only by the school district, but also on the municipal side as well, correct?
Correct. Last summer,
Okay.
that partnership started.
But this data that we're looking at is only for the school district?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank
it's
you.
just the school district dashboard.
And in line with that, is it 30 or 40 a month, like new cases each month?
Yes, yeah. And I did ask our Care Solace project coordinator, how do we compare to other districts? And she said our utilization is high. So this slide, you'll just see some general data on the preferred referrals from families and children, anxiety being the number one, depression, trauma, ADHD, disruptive, suicidal ideation, and it goes on from there, marital, eating, autism, and OCD. I didn't include our substance abuse slide. We don't have a high incidence of referrals coming around substance use. I think there were a total of 9 cases this year. And 8 out of the 9 were staff referred.
That suicide number, have you seen that? Has it risen? Has it been about what it is every year? Like, what's the suicide?
So this is not, this is the percentage of referrals.
Right, the referrals for the reason, but is the referral number gone up? Do we know yet?
So we've only used them for one full academic
full year,
year.
okay.
Yes, so I will report back to you on that.
Next year? I'll be here.
Yeah. Yes, but clearly that's a number we wanna, we want people accessing support and services if they're having any sort of suicidal ideation. So we want access, we want identification.
Yeah.
So if that number goes up, I wouldn't say that's a bad thing. It means that we're getting supports and services to children in need.
Agreed. Thank you.
So on behalf of Chelmsford, the total number of communications that have occurred with Care Solace, and again, I'm stating this number only because it lets you know the weight that's taken off the shoulders of families that might call 40 different providers and still not have access to a counselor. But 33,301 communications from Care Solace has occurred in the last school year on behalf of our families, our faculty, and our students to get them into appropriate care. And right now, our numbers are 42% of the referrals are children, and 40% are adolescents, 18% are adults, and 1% are seniors. And then I just also want to mention before we move off of Care Solace is that they don't just provide access to individual counseling and mental health, they also provide access to psychological assessments, psychiatrists, medication monitoring, partial hospitalizations, inpatient hospitalizations. So they're really trying to expand the scope of what they can do to provide to the varied needs of individuals, because individual counseling might not be the recommended avenue for a child that's being referred. Any questions on Care Solace before we move on to Cartwheel?
I did have a question on, I'm not sure if you have this information or not, but on the quality of the care that people are receiving. One of the questions I had was continuity, because one of the things that I've been hearing from some adolescents and young adults is they'll be seeing someone and that person then will leave that practice and go someplace else, and then they're kind of left to begin the process of searching again. And it could be a few months, it could be, a couple of years or whatever, but it also sometimes is tied to insurance. They're no longer taking a certain type of insurance or whatever. I was wondering how people have found the quality of care and just the continuity of care.
So because a lot of the supports and resources that Care Solace provides is confidential, I don't have like explicit answer to your question. But what I can say is that part of Care Solace is to do a satisfaction check-in with families so that, a couple weeks after they've been in care and services, they've had a few appointments, they'll do check-ins with the family to make sure that they're satisfied, that it's a proper match for the family. And if not, they can go on that search again with the family. So they don't just, as soon as a family's in care, they don't just drop them. There is that follow-up piece, and they take that very seriously.
Oh, that's great.
Because a match is important too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that is a part of that. And in terms of like how long it's taking, we're finding this year's better than the year prior.
Okay.
A year ago, spring was a really challenging time, and families were waiting extended periods of time. I'll get a psychologist that will call me and say, Shannon, it only took 4 days for them to find somebody. So I'm getting some reports that our providers are really happy that things are getting a little bit better. I think, it all depends to what families are looking for. I think telehealth is very readily available, and in-person is still a little bit longer to find that match. But it does not matter what insurance they have, whether they need free care, if they have Mass Health, they will find a match for them.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is purely anecdotal, but I know a family that used Care Solace at the recommendation of school and found it very helpful, and they got a match with a provider that has worked out well for them. They let me know within days, it didn't take long at all, so.
That's great.
It's definitely working for
Feedback. Thank you so
for the
much. And
family I know about, yeah.
And I appreciate the positive feedback, but I also want to hear if anything's not going well. Our representative from Care Solace, our project manager, is so responsive. Anytime I've reached out to her with any concern at all, she is on top of it and remediates the problem immediately. So anytime a family is not satisfied, happy, they need to let us know.
Thank you.
I think one complaint we got from a family was that I'm getting too many calls from them, too many text messages, so we had to say, slow down a little bit. And Care Solace wants that feedback too. If you only want once a week check-ins, if you only want it, at 7 at night, they want to know that so they can customize their response and support to the families.
Thank you.
I did get a lot of phone calls from other school districts this year after we brought Care Solace on board, wanting to know what we thought of them, what our feedback was. So we've been able to provide some positive feedback. So I know a lot of other districts have adopted their support.
That's great.
Okay, so Cartwheel, this was something, and I don't believe I was able to share this with school committee because I presented prior to us bringing this on board. We signed a I would call it a pilot contract with them last October. One of the gaps in supports and services that we were finding families were struggling with was psychiatry. They might be admitted to the hospital or go for a risk assessment and then be discharged, but they wouldn't be getting the care and treatment that they needed in a timely manner. As we know, child and adolescent psychiatry, there's long wait lists, much longer than counselors. And so we found this through a partnership. They're a brand new organization. I think they've been, I think we were the third school that partnered with him last year in Massachusetts, and now they have over 40, just to give you an idea of their growth rate and the need for their support and services. So they provide like an umbrella of support services around MTSS. They provide virtual telehealth individual therapy to children and families. But the one component that we purchased with them to do this pilot with was just the psychiatry, because we felt like that was the one gap, that one missing piece. It's an October to October partnership, so we'll be reevaluating this as we re-enter the new school year. It was roughly 25 students, but they said we could go up if we needed more, that they would see about 25 students over the course of a year in grades 5 through 12 that needed a psychiatric evaluation. And it was a short-term model. They weren't going to get a psychiatrist that would see them weekly over the course of time. It really was more of an assessment model for those children that were exiting either a risk assessment or hospitalization that didn't have access. And within our partnership with them provides like 48-hour response rate to families, and within 1 week they'll be in front of a psychiatrist virtually. It is through telehealth, and they'll get a 60 to 90-minute assessment from the psychiatrist, and then a follow-up written summary of the assessment, and then collaboration as well with their primary care provider and pediatrician, so that anything recommended, whether it's medication or treatment avenues, that the pediatrician can then follow up and support the child and family. So we were a little bit slow to start because this is outside of the box. This is very new and different. And so it required a lot of training of our team here just to get them up to speed. So the way the contract is written is that these are our consultants. They're considered Chelmsford employees. They consult with our faculty and our staff following the assessment process. They don't provide us the written document that they've provided to families. We both agreed that for confidentiality reasons that we didn't need access to that. We just most importantly wanted children and families to receive this support and service in a timely manner. So the families that have been successful and gone through the assessment process have been very pleased. These are, I listed our 3 partners up on the board, but they've added an additional psychiatrist that's bilingual with Spanish. So we're really excited about that. And it's been a wonderful resource. And again, it's a little outside of the box, but we want to help. We want to provide that wraparound approach to mental health and care for families, and we felt like this was a gap and a missing piece for us.
Does anybody have any questions?
Just a comment.
Go ahead.
Just thank you for the work. I'm glad you're doing these programs. I think this is actually really important for the kids. Social emotional learning is actually a really big focus for me, and I think it's really important, especially after like COVID and seeing like the results in my family and like how it affected my kids and all that coming into this. That's why I was kind of interested in the numbers. I'm actually really interested in that. So the anxiety thing I think makes sense. I think it all just makes sense. So
Yeah.
thank you very much for the work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shannon, I do have a question on Cartwheel. So let's say a student goes to the hospital to be assessed, and sometimes what ends up happening, they're there for a very long time, and whatever the issue was now has at least resolved itself on the surface, and then they're sent home. Does the hospital make a referral to Cartwheel, or do we make the referral?
No, it would be a school-initiated referral. So one of our clinical psychologists, one of our school counselors, or one of our social workers would be making that referral in partnership with the family.
Okay.
If this is something that the family felt like they wanted to lean on this, or that they wanted access to this, then we move forward with that. Cartwheel is very much about the partnership with families, the partnership with community-based resources, because they want any recommendations that come out of their assessment to be sustainable to support a child and family. We started the partnership grade 5 through 12th, and throughout the school year, we did have a couple of students that were in grade 3 and 4. So Cartwheel, in a very systematic way, assessed whether or not it was the right move to go forward with those cases, and we were able to in all of the cases that were referred.
That brought up another question, is how do families come to know that this is available, this referral? I know about the Care Solace and it's in our system and the whole thing. Then when does this come up? How would you bring it to their attention, or how do you?
So I would say that would be in partnership with the psychologist or the counselor at the school that's working with the family, that shares this with the family. But we want to have, we're hoping to grow this partnership so that it can be accessible to more families. But it really was like a small pilot that we had started, grade 5 to 12, that kind of evolved throughout the school year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming in tonight to explain this to us, and
Thank you.
I'm very glad that we have these services in place, and you helping us to get our social emotional learning to a place where we can help maybe resolve some of these anxiety issues or other issues post-COVID for our kids. So,
Thank you so much. And if families at home do have questions about Cartwheel, please, I want them to encourage them either to outreach to myself or outreach to the counselor or the psychologist that is at their school.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, moving on to our next agenda item, I'll be turning it over to Joanna. She will be going over the FY 2023 end-of-year budget report.
Thank you. At the July 18th meeting, I had presented the preliminary figures, and this meeting, there were just very few changes to the 3 reports that I presented. So the first report is the local operating budget of $67,500,000, and we spent $66.3 million. We have $1.1 million in open encumbrances, and there is 0 budget left available in the fiscal 2023 budget. Any questions on the local operating budget?
I shouldn't say no, I shouldn't speak for everybody. Does anybody have any questions? No, sorry.
And then the second report is the grants and revolving funds. And again, I presented preliminary, and these are the final figures, and the minor changes on here is just some revenue that came in at the end of June, has posted in our general ledger system that hadn't posted when I put the packet together before July 18th. So just some very minor changes there. And then the last report, there were no changes to these reports as presented on the student activity accounts for the high school and both middle schools. So any questions on the grant and revolving fund or the student activity accounts?
Did you have that question you wanted to ask about the ESSER funds, ESSA
Oh,
funds?
I was read something, and I don't know where it's going for that the extra money that may be funded towards special education because of the increase in the out-of-district, somehow is gonna be tied to whether or not you've used your ESSER money.
I'll look into
Yeah, I
that.
read that somewhere.
I read something, and it was linked to ESSER 2,
Yeah.
I think is what I read.
Right.
But we have spent all of our ESSER 2.
I guess that was where I was going with it, yeah. Everything's already been accounted for.
Yes, ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, we spent out, and then we do have approximately 780,000 available in ESSER 3,
Okay.
which we have until June, or September 30th, 2024,
Okay.
so a little over a year, to spend those funds. Okay?
Yeah, because you hear about that too in the
Yes.
federal government is saying, you know, we're gonna take all the
Yes.
money back if you don't spend everything.
Right.
Yes.
You might have
Yes.
read it in the Globe, it was a big front page
Yeah.
article in the
Yeah.
Globe about a lot of districts aren't
Yes.
spending that money.
Right, and then, yeah.
Right. So
Not
we're
us.
spending it.
Yes, we should
Thank
be.
you.
Wisely, of course.
Yes.
Spending it wisely. No, just, yeah, I just wanted to.
Thank you.
With all the money they save, they could build another F-35. I mean, like, whatever. I'm sorry. That's-
Is there
digress.
any other questions? for Joanne?
Excellent work this year, Joanna.
As always.
Thank you.
Yes.
Every year, that 0 at the end is perfect.
Thank you.
Great.
All right.
So we're moving on to the third agenda item, which is my agenda item. This is an end-of-the-year update on our academic data based on iReady. For those of you that may be watching for your first time or not familiar with iReady, it is our benchmarking system, but it's an adaptive program that once the students take their initial tests, it will then adapt based on lessons that they need where their ability level is. So it gives us information, but it's also used for additional lessons and practice for our students. So tonight, I'm just gonna be going over our mathematics data as well as our reading data and talk a little bit about performance as well as growth for our students in the district. So this is going to be an overview of all of our data across the district. So it's not just, certain levels, but we will break it down a little bit for you. So for our math performance, one of the things to keep in mind is that we do test the students at the beginning of the year. So it's an end of the year test, so where they would be when they finish 5th grade, 6th grade, whatever grade they're in. But we would like to have an idea of where our students currently are performing at the beginning of the year. Important to find out where students are at that are not necessarily at grade level, but I think what's equally important at the beginning of the year is to find out the students that are already early on or mid or above grade level, because those students need to be pushed a little bit further. So it's not always looking for the students that may not have met the standard, but if you have met the standard, what are we doing for those students once they've met the standard or some other supports? So if you can take a look at mathematics in general, this is the entire district that was tested. We were obviously at the beginning of the year lower than where, kids would be at the end of the year, but then they've made some significant gains in mathematics by the end of the school year. And we were talking a little bit about performance and as well as growth for these students, because that does make a difference based on where the students are currently performing. So this is all of our students for mathematics K through 8. And then to look at the breakdown for our students by levels, you'll see that certain grade levels we have to put some more focus on because they may not have made as much achievement. You have to keep in mind too that many of our students, not our K and 1 students, but 2 all the way up, are still working through the effects of the pandemic. So a lot of these kids were not in school, or if they were in school, they could have been completely hybrid, or they could have been missing some skills, they could have been homeschooled. There's a lot that goes into this. So we are still working through the effects of the pandemic, especially in mathematics, because it's very concrete and sequential for students. So this is what it looks like for our K through 5 students beginning in the fall and then in spring. And then you'll see where the gap is a little bit wider when we get to our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students, because that is where a lot of that mathematics makes those very significant changes. So that has been the focus of the math department and some of the areas that we're very much focused in for specific lessons, especially in numeracy and algebraic equations, because those are the 2 foundational domains for mathematics in general. So that gives you an idea of where our students are at. And then to give you an idea of what's changed from pre-pandemic to where we are now, and you'll notice that the 2021 results are not involved in here because there was a lot happening during the 2021 school year. Students were home, they were taking the tests either by themselves, we weren't aware of the testing environments, who may have been supporting them do that for that, so we omitted that information to just get an idea of what the trend data looks like in math for our students. So although the gap has widened, we are not anywhere near where most districts ended up for math because of the pandemic, and we are kind of holding strong, and we're seeing some, leveled areas here, but in general, our students didn't make complete backwards success because we found that a lot of the districts in the area were not doing well in math in general during the pandemic and then the effects of it now. So this gives you an idea of where Chelmsford is landing relative from 18-19 to where we are 22-23. And then this gives you that breakdown of what it looks like by grade level. So our current students, K and 1, are having typical school years, right? This is what kids have seen, but then when you start getting in grades 2 up, these are some of the students that may have some gaps in their schooling as well as the skills that they were learning. So this is the K through 5, and then 6, 7, and 8. How they've started in pre-pandemic to where they are now.
Any idea why, like grade 2, is probably the one that,
Yeah, so grade 2, we noticed this in grade 2 as well as in reading. So we're gonna dig down to where, we kind of have an idea where the schools are. So we have to actually put some more services for those students. So this is all of the grade 2 across the district.
Yeah.
We can see where those gaps are really the wide part for the specific schools. Okay, and then this is a nationally normed test. So to look at the scores from spring 18-19 compared to where Massachusetts students are performing today, all of Massachusetts, then we take a look at how Chelmsford's doing, and we are outperforming students in Massachusetts as well as the norm test prior to the pandemic. So 18-19 is before the pandemic. And then this is where Chelmsford is now, so we are making some significant gains compared to many of the Massachusetts districts. This was the point that I was trying to make earlier, that although we still have gaps and we have areas of improvement and students that we have to support, as a whole, Chelmsford is outperforming many of the Massachusetts districts. And we're seeing this in our MCAS scores as well, so that gives us another data point to make sure that it's not just one test. There's multiple tests that are giving us this indication, so that's very helpful.
I remember during COVID, this was a topic that we were discussing because there was a lot being written about the math scores, how much of a hit they were taking as a result of COVID, during COVID.
Yep, across Massachusetts.
Right, and so, obviously, I'd like to see them higher, but I'm glad that we're on the right track and moving in the right direction.
Right, we want to see them, all at least being on grade level.
Yeah.
And if not above grade level, but we will, I can see the different bar graphs are moving in that direction.
Right.
It's just we're not done with COVID. Although we're done with it ourselves, we're not done for our students.
Right.
This is going to be for the long haul for many of those students that did not have typical schooling. But the good news too is although students' performance may not be at grade level, their growth is happening. So if you look at the 4 different quadrants, obviously you want to be in the high performance, high growth area, and we can see where that dip is for grade 2. They're still right on the cusp of the oh, it's right there, but it's so close. But that's important. Like, you want to see that the students are growing. So even if I'm not at grade level, I'm a grade level below, I want to see that students are growing. They need to make that growth in order to eventually close that gap. So this is good news. We want to see that there. But then what we want to see is to make sure we don't have any gaps based on race. So iReady doesn't have all of our demographics. We limit how much information actually comes out of the district because that's student information. But it is good to see that we don't have such a wide gap between our races of Black or African American students, 2 or more races, and then our white students, right? We don't want to see such a wide gap that those students are so far behind. However, I do want to point out that in the blue area there, where you see that annual typical growth of 117%, 111%, that is very important, because if they're just making typical growth of 100%, they're not closing that gap. You need to go above 100% in order to start to close the gap. Because if you stay at 100%, you'll always be maybe that year behind. You need to do more than 100%, and we're seeing that our students are starting to go up and over 100% for all the different races, which is very, very important to see those students succeed.
Do they have this information for students on IEPs?
So that is kind of a topic of discussion between the tech director and myself.
Okay.
So again, we try not to put out too much student information, but we can start to pull that through Panorama, and we are talking about giving iReady access, because especially where our strategic plan goes, is we're trying to
Right.
close the gap for those students, we need to start digging down to get the specific students. So we can pull them from Panorama, but what it doesn't allow us to do is, no matter what, we have Panorama, which is kind of like an overview of like, here are the students, this is how they're scoring, but to get the deep down data and how they're doing on each of the standards, we need to actually give the information to iReady. So we are still in discussions about that, but it looks like we're leaning towards providing them with the demographics for those students, so we can identify those students even easier than what we have now.
Thank you.
Okay. The other question, it just, because math is cumulative, it really is, and you've got to understand something in order to move on. It's true with everything, but in math especially. So the only way really to get the students who are not at grade level into grade level would be to add in those additional supports. Okay.
Well, that and to have specific lessons that are targeting those two domains that I talked about, because those are the two foundational domains. So the math teachers have developed specific lessons that they may not have given that many lessons in the past, but now they have to provide even more lessons on that before they can move on to the next domain, such as measurement, geometry, to move those students forward. So that, along with interventionists, right, and practice, so they need more, not just something different. They need more of practice around these different standards.
And those are the kinds of monies that are available through these
Correct.
federal funds that we were given
Yep.
because of COVID, right? So then, and this is throughout the system, it doesn't end at grade 8 when they go on to high school. It's throughout the entire system. And for us, do we actually have those interventionists in place now and so on, or are we hiring? What's the status of that?
Right, we do. We have them for elementary, and then we've been hiring them for middle school. Middle school is new, so that was what we started to do. One of the barriers for us is not the money, it's not doing that, is finding the qualified person. Because
Right.
once you start to get into middle school, they need to have some math background and a certification in math, right? So, you're finding that right person. The ELA is a little different. We can, catch people up to speed on that, but when it comes to the math, you have to have a qualified math interventionist. And we've found several of them, but that is always a barrier for us, but we find someone.
Okay,
know.
good.
Yep.
Terrific. That, I know that's the challenge.
And I think it's gonna be, with the new grade reconfiguration, it's gonna be helpful, because we can then even be even more targeted. It's hard when you're an interventionist and you have a 5th grader, 1 minute, and then your 8th grader comes walking through the door. These are two different students. So I think with this configuration, someone that is really for 7th and 8th grade students, those are the people that are gonna apply for those jobs. And the 5th and 6th people are gonna be people that really wanna work with that population.
With that
So I'm
group.
kind of
Yeah, I can
excited
see
about
that new configuration helping a lot with the intervention part piece.
Yeah, when you're dealing with grade spans like that, even at the high school, they're very different students, so you have to be constantly adjusting. So that can get a little cumbersome. This, I think, is gonna make it
That's great.
better. That's my hope.
Wonderful. Now, one other question is, now we have a certain number exceed and do extremely well, the grade level. And of course, those are the people who I have reached out to me many times during the year. My student has exceeded the iReady, what can they do, and so on. So, I know we have something in place. You had said to me that we do.
Yeah, we have IXL. They're
Let
supposed
you
to move on
address.
to the next program, which is IXL, which goes all the way up to high school.
Okay,
It's
great.
a little bit of a different program. It's more like computation, right? Practicing those basic skills, but that's important. But that is the next part that they're supposed to go on to after they've actually aged out grade-wise on iReady.
On
So
iReady.
you could be in, so this is typically our 7th and 8th grade students, so they've already met all the standards, so there's no place else to go, they've hit the ceiling. So they transfer into the IXL program when students are doing practice through iReady, and that goes it's actually, they have a program that's pre-K through 12, but that's when we purchase that next program for them to use, and that goes all the way through to high school.
Okay, thank you.
And I had started to ask you about that, because I noticed that it gives us very detailed percentages of children who are 1, 2, and 3 grade levels below, but it doesn't really give us that information about those who are 1, 2, and 3 levels above. And to be honest, that's the parents I hear from most. The kids are like, my kid is already can do this at their grade level. What's happening for them? And I know we have a mandate to help kids at least get to grade level and an ethical responsibility, but I think that we need to know how many kids really are above grade level to be looking at even more, because I'm glad to hear we have that. The IXL, you said it's called?
IXL.
But it doesn't kick until 7th grade, and we have
Well,
kids.
it's whenever the student has actually gone through all the programming through iReady and they've met 8th grade standards, we have a couple of 6th graders where that's happened, right? So those students move on. So it's not just your 7th and 8th graders, it's when the student actually hits the end of the standards.
Okay, that's great. So for instance, in elementary school, if you've hit 4th grade, would an elementary school student doing iReady be able to bump into 5th and 6th, or do you have to?
It will, so the program for that student, so if I'm a student and I've done my diagnostic test, right? So it's beginning of the year, or let's just say towards the end of the year, or mid-year, what it does is it makes a My Path program.
Right.
So it starts to give them extra practice based on where they are. So if they've now met the end of the year standard, it will move them into the next year to then give them next year's
Yeah.
standards for their My Path program.
Right.
So it's adaptive like that.
Yeah, I've seen a printout of some of that to show where a kid is, but I just wondered if there's a finite, like, if you're in elementary school, does it stop at the elementary? But even for those
No, it
kids,
would
it can
keep
keep going.
going. It goes, the program
that's
goes all
good
the
to
way to
know.
8th grade. So if
That's
you're
good to
in
know.
4th grade and you're suddenly at 6th grade standards, it will bring you to 6th grade standards. And if you're struggling with a certain standard, it will bring you back to a 5th grade. It's a very adaptive program. So it goes up, it goes down based on where the student's strength is and how they're actually doing in the practice piece. The practice piece is key, and I think that's one of our other struggles of like time, right? We run out of time. We only have so much time during the school day. So just providing that additional practice for those students. Teachers, when you get your teacher list, and you may not remember this, when you're seeing them on iReady, you get to see what grade level they're at.
Yeah.
So this program's not gonna tell us how many kids in a report are 1, 2, 3 grade levels or above. I know by the light green and the dark green, right? But it won't tell me if it was, 8th grade or whatever. But if I'm a teacher, I'm like, oh, look at this. Susan's actually reading at a 7th grade level. Wow, okay, I gotta make sure I'm working, giving her some stretch growth here.
Yeah, and someday, I'd love to hear about what is being done to help teachers do that stretch growth.
Right.
So I'd love
Right,
to hear
there's
about that
additional
someday.
lessons
I know
in this
that, yeah.
program. Right, there's so much that this program has, like it has additional lessons if a student's not learning based on your lesson. We could actually give that to the interventionist. So there's lessons in here, there's standards mastery, there's a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But there's also that fine balance of like, how long is the student on the computer opposed to working with an adult? But those lessons are lessons that an adult would give to them. It's not computer-based. You pull it out and you could go through another set of lessons.
Right, and that's what I was curious about, what the teacher can do within math lessons for those students. So someday I'd love to hear more
It
about
gives you
that.
like 5 different options for each of those standards.
Do you have something you wanted to say? Just to follow up, so I was kind of wondering the same thing. We have these scores and we may have students who exceed. How does that change the content of what they're doing in the class?
That's where the teacher comes in. So
Okay.
think of curriculum like an elastic.
Right.
Right, you can expand it higher, you can expand it
Okay.
lower, and you can make adjustments. So for math or even in reading, they can do this as well. Usually it's done like through station work, and when the students are doing like station work, the teacher's then pulling up a group of students based on ability, right?
Okay.
So whether they're at a certain reading level, they're then going over skills at that point. So those students are usually getting more of a small group instruction from the teacher. So teacher does whole group lesson, and then as students do practice and rotate through stations, teachers are polling students in small groups.
So to Susan's point, I think it would be interesting to see how iReady drives instruction in the classroom.
And then this could be one of the stations. So like,
Right.
I'm seeing all of you. My other group is working on this. Someone might be working on some type of a, game that works with the standards. So teachers are usually very equipped to be able to do this.
I have complete faith in our
Walk into any
teachers.
elementary school.
Yep. Well, I mean, just based on some of the videos that we saw from some of the schools, it was pretty amazing what some of the kids were doing.
And in the new math program that we actually purchased, especially the elementary one, they have they break it up for them as the different stations that they can work on.
Oh, good.
Glad to hear it.
That's good.
And there's
So
additional practice within that program.
if you keep within this, they get to 7th grade, and then you've got the honors math steps in the middle school level, is that right? So
Grade
it's on-
7, yes.
So and this is, for that, to evaluate and to assess whether a student is gonna go into the honors math path. Is iReady considered? And so when you take all of this into consideration.
Yeah, so
how
when
they're
they
doing.
have, there's different criteria, and it's actually on the website,
Mm-hmm.
as students go into the honors programs, whether it's middle school math or the high school, there are several criterias in order to make an informed decision, so not one drives.
And iReady is part of it.
iReady is one of them, your MCAS score, teacher recommend, there's always gonna be that human component, right? Teacher recommendation, they use National Math, National
Yeah.
Math League, so how the students are scoring on that. So I think they have 5 different criteria, which will allow them to go into honors, and then there's always an override process, right? So even after you've gone through this and there's no teacher recommendation for it, if a parent really feels compelled, or even a student, I've had students come to me, especially at the high school level, to petition, they can petition to go into it.
So, given all that, this year, when we look at students, the number of students moving into the honors program in 7th grade, are we at about the same level?
It's usually about the same number of students, give or take. It's a tricky situation because sometimes, you could be at 32 students, which is a tricky number to put into courses. But what's actually nice, and when we're looking at the scheduling, now that we've broken the schools up, we've actually put 2 sets of 4 teachers together. So let's just take 7th and 8th grade, because that is where the honors is happening. And those schedules are running concurrently. So you're really a team of 8, even though you still have your 4 team members, your English teacher, your social studies teacher, the majority of the students will stay in that 4-person team, but there's an 8-person team now running a same schedule. So if you have to run 2 math classes, or almost a combination, advanced, accelerated, and honors, we have much more options to do that. We're doing that for the grade 5 and 6 too, so those 2 teen teachers are now running in a group of 4 at the same time. Just in case you ever had to cross-team a student, that's happened before at the middle school level, where they may have a completely different math teacher than their other 3 teachers, but now it's almost like they're a group of 8, a pack of 8.
There's another benefit.
Yeah. That was
Super.
we were very excited when we were doing the scheduling that we were able to do that.
Thank you.
And just a quick question, just because I don't know. So when I was teaching, iReady wasn't in place yet.
Okay.
And I think it's great. I hear great things about it. But are there also still just standard, good old-fashioned unit tests given
You'll-
within the curriculum itself?
Not necessarily unless the teacher has created them separately. I mean, they're doing, especially in grades K1 and 2, it's really more teacher anecdotal, right, back and forth with
Yeah.
students and writing notes. You'll see the unit tests more in foundations. We have to give unit tests to make sure that those students are, where they need to be. Oh, that was one of the other things that came up, and we'll get to the reading next, but our phonics scores have gone much higher. When we look at the different strands of ELA, huge distinct difference. Ready to go on? Okay, no problem. So reading, we're gonna be doing the same thing, but looking at the reading scores. So again, just giving you that quick overview of the entire district, where they were at the beginning of the year to where they are at the end of the year. You'll always find that the ELA scores are typically higher for students, because it's a lot of skills that we go over consistently than not concrete sequentially. You can always go back into a different skill. So there's the difference, obviously, between ELA and math. I will tell you, one of the great things that came from COVID, and I use the word great, I know we had a lot of hardship and a lot of things that we had to do, but I'll tell you, we were in the middle of a curriculum adoption when COVID hit in 2020. So we just finished it. We said, this is it. We're going with FPC Classroom and foundations. And then, the world stopped. But I'll tell you, with all the amount of time that was available with teachers, and we were creative, we were able to give so much professional development that we wouldn't have had time for in a typical school year because of people being remote and that, Wednesday's options of everybody being remote, we had more time and access with teachers than we would ever have, and we still don't have at this point. We still only have department time, PD days. We did so much PD around our new programming. So, that's a great thing to think about, that we had access to teachers. So much stuff was remote. Teachers could go back to things because it was recorded or it was asynchronous. So if 2:00 in the morning was your time, here you go at it. So that was a good thing that came from COVID. So we were very fortunate because we were smack in the middle of this and this stuff was coming. We put a lot of stuff in people's trunks of their cars. It was amazing, little caravans that happened. But I am pleased with the reading and the new programming and how we were able to actually really access those teachers. And I think they appreciated it. So again, this is what it looks like if you break it down by grade levels. Look at kindergarten. We actually had a lot of debate around, do we test the kids in kindergarten? We know they're coming in missing skills. However, what it does is it opens up the My Path program for them so they can get the additional practice. But it really gives us an idea of this is how well our kids are reading. We didn't have that information. Our kindergartners are so new that we just didn't have a lot of information, and now we can actually take a look at how our students are doing. So you'll see those big jumps for those students that weren't necessarily as affected by COVID, and then you'll start to see where some of the gaps are, but we have interventionists at the elementary level and then at the middle school level as needed for reading as well. So that's very helpful for us. And then our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students, this is where it gets a little trickier because these students are obviously, reading to learn, but they're also looking at some more complex literature strands. So you'll start to see that breakdown. But these kids their phonics are in place. Obviously, it's vocabulary development that we have to put some focus on because even if you're an excellent reader, if you don't have the academic vocabulary, you will lose your comprehension. Right? Think of like a joke. Somebody makes a joke, you can read, you can understand jokes, but if you don't have the context of the joke, you're just laughing along with the people because everybody else in the room is laughing. So this gets a little bit more nuanced as they start to really look at different types of literature. And then again, how this has looked across before COVID and to where we are now, we didn't see major dips at all in reading, which was key. And then this gives you that breakdown again, where they were pre-pandemic to where they are now. You'll see where some of the grade levels we have to put some focus on, if it's school specific, right, or is it grade 2 in general? Do we have to look at different changes in the curriculum? Where's the breakdown that we're seeing some of those larger gaps, especially in reading? And then 6, 7, and 8. And then again, normed tests. This is what the difference is for obviously normed tests for spring 18-19 pre-pandemic. Massachusetts as a whole for this current school year. Again, Chelmsford outperforming the state of Massachusetts. Even better, we're a little much higher in that quadrant there of high performance and high growth, looking at all of the grade levels. So again, even if a student is not at grade level, you want to see that they're making growth in order to close the gap. And then when you look at that gap piece again, relative to race, you'll see in general whether they're students of multi-races, Black or African American, white, those students are getting over 100% growth, which is what you need in order to close the gap. And more questions if you have them for me.
Is there any more questions? I know we were asking you a lot during the presentation.
That's fine. Sometimes
But
it's
does anybody
easy.
have any other questions or follow-up comments?
So when it comes to the ELA and we get to the middle school, because I hate this, I'm sorry. I remember the last time we had a report, the same thing. You get to the end of 8th grade and you're gonna be transitioning over to the high school, and to see 17% in one of these things as being, below the grade level and going on to high school, is really tough for me to look at, and I'm sure for, everybody. So we have a program now in the middle school, right, that's helping with the reading.
So we have reading specialists at all levels.
Yeah.
And then we have, we're putting in the interventionist as well. So that will help. And when they do get to the high school, if these are students that are not reading as well as they should be, they actually go into reading for high school. We've identified who these students are. So the reading specialist at the high school will have them in there. And there's also the lit and language, right? So they have other classes that they can go into to help support the reading. And usually we are able to close that gap.
Okay.
What is that 17%? Like, what is the, I guess for lack of a better way to put it, right, what is it comprised of? Is it our ELA not our ELA, ELL students?
It could be L students, it could be special ed students, it could be students that are having, behavioral issues, or maybe they're just something's happening at home too, right? Like there's a combination of all of those students mixed together. So, it's not just one facet, but sometimes it is some of our students that are already have a disability and may already be a grade level behind or two, and they are probably making growth, but they may not just be at grade level. So that's why sometimes people only get to a certain grade level. You have to have a certain amount of basic skills, but when they do get to the high school level, there's still other supports. It's not like, oh, sorry, now go 4 years.
Yeah.
There's a lot of supports for those students, and that's what the reading specialist does at that level.
When you're drilling down into this data and you're looking at the 17% and who is in this 17% category, you're looking at what might be the mitigating factors.
Correct.
Okay.
And if they actually had growth too.
Right.
Because again, this is performance, right? This is an end of the year standard. If you are already starting behind, you may not get to that end of the year standard, but you made a year's growth. Right. That's huge, right? And it's going to take you certain amount of time in order to do that and more practice.
Yeah. And it looks like, when we look at these charts, that it's that transition from 6th to 7th, where it starts to increase.
Yeah.
In that category. So hopefully, again, the fact that we have this new breakdown in our middle school level will help, because I've often heard that for many students, it's really difficult to adjust to the requirements of 7th grade versus 6th grade.
It is.
Suddenly you've got a lot more teachers, you've got a lot more standards that you need to meet.
It's a social aspect.
It's a social aspect as well, the whole thing.
Big
So
time.
hopefully this does help
does.
with this transition. But yeah, that's
Right, 'cause
one
we
number
can-
I always look
We can have
at.
specific conversations around 7th grade students, right? Instead of
Right.
having an assembly with 5 through 8 students, right? If you're even
Yeah.
doing expectations, it just looks very different.
Yeah,
The other thing I'd like to bring it back to is we had that deep dive about special ed, and there's been recommendations made. So in years going forward, as we look how to put some of those recommendations into place, the hope is that that will also help close this gap. And now we have some ideas about what needs to be done. So I think we'll just be able to move forward doing that.
which would be great.
And I know I sound like a broken record, but we have to be teaching the standards, right? Like,
Right.
we've all been guilty of maybe doing something outside of the standards, but we have to really focus in on what these students need to be successful.
Yeah,
It's
and it-
more important than ever.
And it
right?
becomes
Because they may
more
not be getting it.
individual
Right.
in the needs. And so I think adding in a parent-teacher conference at the middle school level is also great. And we should see some impact of that going forward as well, I think.
Right.
So hopefully.
Yeah, and what's been helpful is those can be in person and online, so
Very,
sometimes people can't get to the schools. I get
all
it.
good, all good.
And all these numbers correlate pretty well with the MCAS results we see too?
Dead on. That's where, like, so we have Panorama that brings all of
Yeah.
the data in one spot, so I can go right across. I'll do like the look, but if you see like some type of a glitch, you can go right to the school level, the grade level, obviously the teacher level, and find out like what's going on. There's always gonna be that conundrum of like, students that may be on an IEP, they may not be testing, their test scores may not reflect their grade, but that's a grading issue. Like, we gotta figure out some way of not because last thing you want to do is be like, well, okay, because you didn't meet this on here, then you're really getting like a C or a D, like, that's just terrible. So we've got to figure out a better way that the grades could be an alert, right, when students aren't doing well, but if they're already a special ed student, they're receiving services. So sometimes the grading can be, just doesn't give enough information. So the test scores going across are really what's helpful. And then what's nice is that it graphs it for us, so like you know, sometimes you're looking at test scores, like you're looking at numbers right now that are linear. It's always good to see, like, is it going up? Is it dipping down? Is it going back and forth? So it's a very helpful program for us.
In terms of ELA and honors level, what happens? In the 7th grade, is there an honors program that starts for ELA?
No, it
going
doesn't
into
start
the 8th
until high
grade?
school for ELA.
It is at high school? Okay, anyway, future, but consideration of
We
that
used to
since
have
we have
multiple
such.
levels when I first started
Yeah.
teaching 7th grade, but that was not indicative of a student's performance. So they then eventually go up to the different, it's not a tracking system, it's a level system. And they might choose to do honors ELA, honors social studies, both. You'll find a lot of varieties of different ways kids, so it's not like once you're in honors, everything has to be honors, but that won't start until
High school.
until high school, grade 9.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No problem. So moving on to the next agenda item, and I'll take this down in a minute so it's not distracting. We have the approval of our handbooks. We're going to start off with the Student and Family Handbook. We can move on to the CHS Addendum. What you'll find in the Student and Family Handbook, as well as the CHS Addendum, is not a ton of changes. But what you'll see is a lot around the student discipline, the 37H and 3/4. So there was a change in the student discipline law that started in November of 2022, where you couldn't go just right to suspension. So you have to try and find alternate ways to work with students, whether it's re-educating them, providing them with some type of supports before you go right to suspension. So these handbooks were sent out to our attorneys. Our attorneys made sure that those adjustments were made to reflect this current year's handbook. So that's what you'll see as the majority of the changes that are in there. CHS handbook, you'll see some date changes, some percentages changes based on some numbers that we received, numbering and laws, and then again, those suspension law updates and different things that we pay for. Like, there was a section in the CHS addendum that was on fines. And those that the town of Chelmsford somehow collected, I'm sure they did back in the day, but that doesn't happen anymore. So we just removed them. So there are not a lot of changes.
Crazy here.
Huh? Yeah, no, it was like something about parking fines and somehow the town of Chelmsford, there's a very antiquated piece in there. So the high school removed that. Some of the places where you see highlighted in yellow, I did talk to Principal Murray today, that's just a holding place for them to to change the date and revisit. So once these, ignore the formatting, because we will change the formatting. It wasn't worth trying to make it beautiful for this, because once you go through those changes and put it back, the formatting changes again. So once you've had a chance to look at these items and you approve them this evening, then we will have those readjusted and then put up. Some of the other things that you'll see in this is that it refers to different links. Like, for example, in the Family and Student Handbook, it talks about the CHS addendum, and there's a link. Until that's approved tonight, we can't put that up and change the link. So we'll fix all of the formatting once this is approved.
There is formatted stuff.
Does anybody have any comments or questions?
No.
So, thank you to everyone that worked on this. I think one of the reasons why we're seeing less revisions is because the hard work that everybody's been putting into this for the last several years to kind of bring things online. The other thing too is I would really encourage families to look at this. I mean, we have no way of knowing if they do, but there's a lot of really good information in here.
Correct.
That would answer a lot of questions for parents, or just give them information about the school district in general that could be very helpful to them, as they're navigating each school year. So I really hope that people will take the time to take a look at it. And even if they don't,
Right,
you're still responsible for the information in here.
correct.
So,
And you said the handbook is in a link online.
So both of them will both be in links on the website, but some of the handbooks reference other handbooks, and until those handbooks are approved, such as the CHS addendum, we can't change the link. both of these are in here, and they're also translated.
Okay, good.
So once these are approved, we'll send those in, any of the changes, we'll just send it in for translation services. And we'll have them both available on the website. So there's a link on the main website for Chelmsford, and then every school has the link, so parents can access it there.
It's really good if this is stressed at the initial meeting that usually Principal Murray has with the deans and the parents.
Yep.
And how to access this.
Right.
It's a really good thing, if it can be pointed out.
All right, any other questions or comments? I'll take a motion.
Yep, can I do them together?
You can do them together, yes.
Motion to approve the 2023-24 Chelmsford Public Schools Student Handbook and CHS Addendum Updates as presented.
Second.
All right, any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
5-0 in favor. Thank you.
Great, and so moving on to the handbook theme, the employee handbook. So these were the changes that were reviewed by our Director of Human Resources, Diane Carey, also sent out to our attorneys for review for the changes. You'll see just two changes in there was the, besides like the formatting and things like that, was the changes in the healthcare flexible spending amount from $2,600 to $3,050. And then changes from 2020 to 2023, the tax sheltered annuity maximum contribution. And then on page 13, then we added in the Family and Medical Leave Act policy.
Was that not in there before?
It wasn't, it never has been. I mean, we have to follow the law, but it was the recommendations of our attorney to have it into the handbook. So it didn't preclude us from following the law, but I think sometimes you have to have it accessible where people are looking.
And it's not a contract anyway, I mean, it's a handbook, not.
Well, it is. I mean, it's not a contract, but I mean, there are certain
Gotta be
things in here that are offensive.
Yeah, it's a
that we
reference for
have to-
people, so.
It's a good reference,
not
yeah, no,
going
I
It's a
to
good
that
reference. I think when you know, as an employee, you only know what you know, right? I mean, even just thinking back to like when I first started teaching, sometimes you just didn't know where stuff was. So if it's in the handbook, like I wouldn't have known about Family Leave Act until I saw it probably in a handbook.
Right.
Nobody's just Googling that or, you know.
Right.
So I think
Is there a
it's that.
section in the contract very specifically about that still?
Yep.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
we
I-
do.
yeah.
I don't have a copy of the.
But, you know, again, not everybody
carry
goes
it
to the
around.
contract, you might go to a handbook before a contract. I'm just trying to think of, I don't know, when I was first teaching, like, what would I have gone to?
So I do want to thank Diane for these updates and, and I'm so glad that we have this in place because it's only been within the last 6 years that we actually had an employee handbook. So I think this is an excellent resource as well and hope people utilize it.
They do.
Now, do employees sign off that they've received a copy?
Yeah, it's on the link, like, we link it to the website, so everything's accessible for them.
Great. All right, any other questions? All right, Dennis, I'll take a,
Motion to approve the 2023-24 Chelmsford Public Schools Employee Handbook as presented.
Second.
all right, any other further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
5-0.
Okay, and next on the agenda is the approval of the bullying prevention and intervention plans that you see actually linked in some of these handbooks. So this is, again, once all of these handbooks and the intervention plan are approved, or if there's any changes, this is something that we will go over with all of our administrators to make sure that they're aware, any changes that may be happening, questions that they might have. We have an administrative retreat every year, and this is one of our talking points because this is very important that we follow through with this and they have a solid understanding of how the prevention and the intervention plan works.
All right, does anybody have any questions?
All of these different things, they correspond to what we have in our policies as well.
Yes.
I'm just gonna ask a question. On page 11 is collaboration with families and notification requirements about anti-bullying policies and cyberbullying and online notifications to families and so on. We send out those notices at the beginning of the year to all,
We send them out and then at the parent open house nights, they're reviewed.
okay.
So I want to thank everybody that worked on this over the summer. I know I'm pleased to see the updates in here and things. This is a really nice document. I like the way that it's laid out in terms of, establishing the priorities. I really like the definitions, because I think that that's really important for people to understand, as, we're talking about these issues, that we have a common language.
Right, sometimes terms are thrown out there.
Right.
That people may or may not know the definition of the actual term.
Right. And I'm also glad to see that training and professional development is also addressed in this as well for our staff, because I do think it's important that this happens on an ongoing basis. And I know that we're only required to update this every 2 years.
Correct, but we think it's very important, so we make sure that we're updating it every year, which gives actually that refresher as well, and then make sure our attorneys have taken a look at this to make sure that there's nothing that we're missing.
Great, so I'm glad that we spent some time, even though I don't think we were on schedule to do that we did some.
We already had this approved last year, we
Right.
didn't have to bring it up, but it's that important that we would bring it back to.
Right, and so I'm glad to see some of the things change here. I did want to ask about one thing, because I think this is important for people to understand, is this, because of social media, okay, we kind of have this like gray zone where things happen outside of school, and that they may come into school, or sometimes they may not come into school, but where is our responsibility and our obligation to students in terms of, following through on this, on bullying?
Are you talking about from outside?
Well,
Or
like both, like.
social media?
Yeah, like, let's say something happens outside of school, social media, and then it comes into the school, okay?
So whether it's outside or the social media happens in school, I mean, let's be real here, kids have a lot of devices. Once it starts to affect the learning environment, that's where we intervene
Okay,
as a school district. So even if it had started outside, once it comes into the learning environment, so if it's continuing, that's when the school district would actually intervene.
so it could be the learning environment for the entire class, it could also be the learning environment for an individual student.
Correct.
Okay. All right, so I do, I will encourage everybody, I know that everybody's taken a look at this already, and that we're going to propose acceptance of this, but I think I would like to see this, after families have had a chance to take a look at this, back on our agenda again, to see if there's any other feedback or concerns that people may have.
Okay, so the only thing is this affects all of the handbooks to be.
No, I'm not
Oh,
talking about
okay.
changing that.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about like, okay, what are some of the things
Yeah,
in
people
this?
have questions, or
Right.
if they need
How can we
additional
follow up?
training. Principals
Yes.
can always do that. If
Yes,
parents
so-
have a lot of questions.
Right,
they
because
can
there's a lot of
certainly do that.
information in this.
It is.
And so, some people may be seeing it for the first time tonight, and if they have questions or concerns, to bring that up, because as you said, we review it every year. And so, although we're gonna vote to approve this for this year, I think that, we're always open to whatever input people may have.
And then, I don't know, Susan, I don't know if you remember, like, I remember using as a teacher, like, those rubrics are very helpful. Because like you walk the students through like we were when they first came out, I remember being kind of like robotic about it, like, okay, this happened. But then you get a little bit more fluent with it, and it is a process, and you follow the process and have some faith in the process, it works out, as long as you're addressing it.
Right, and I think those rubrics are really important also for parents to take a look at and to understand, what how things are handled. There's a very sequential process in this. And I also really like the part around what we're doing in our school curriculum
Right.
to address bullying. So I think this is a really good document, and I really encourage people to take a look at that. Any other questions? Anything else? All right, Dennis, I'll take a motion.
Make a motion to approve the Chelmsford Public Schools bully prevention and intervention plan updates as presented.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
5-0.
Okay, moving on in our agenda, we have some approvals of field trips. There's 2 for your consideration. They're both music ones, one's in November. And the reason there's a little bit of TBD on there is that we have to find out, which students are actually going in the final costs. But because they're out of state, and one of them is for an actual school day right before the April vacation, therefore here for your approval.
Can we get an update on these as they get a little bit closer?
Yes.
About the number of students?
First one in November is
Yep.
very specific to only several students, because that was actually a question that we had for the music department and the high school principal, of like, how many students are we actually pulling out before Thanksgiving, and, with travel, what's gonna happen.
Staffing.
Yeah, that's very specific. That's only for, a few top students if they're
Okay.
going to participate in this, so we can give you an update. The other one's a much larger field trip.
Okay, great.
These field trips, the students pay for these field trips, like I'm looking out to Seattle, Washington for 4 days, can't be a cheap trip.
Yeah, that is those specific students in band that go out with Matt Sexauer to that program and do the audition.
Do them one at a time.
Yeah, let's do one at a time, please.
Okay, a motion to approve the Chelmsford High School band field trip to Seattle, Washington for the Western International Band Clinic from November 17th to the 21st, 2023.
Second.
Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
5-0.
You want to go over the second, what the second one is, or?
And then the second one is a larger field trip. That is for multiple students to go and do the festivals and perform. So I don't have the full numbers, and when they get closer to that, we can give you an update.
So this is for next.
This is for
April
April 2024.
2024.
So it's this school year, but it's for April 2024, and again, out of state.
All right, I make a motion to approve the Chelmsford High Performance Musical Ensemble field trip to New York City from April 11th to 15th, 2024.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
5-0 in favor.
So,
Lydia, you did a great job.
thank you. And then we can turn it over to Donna if she wants to find out if there's any liaison reports.
Yep, anybody have any liaison reports? Okay, any new items, or action items, any new items for future agendas or any action items?
Hey, Brian.
Go ahead, it's okay. I think it's gonna be the,
Probably, yeah, just so we
Yeah.
get an updated email from the town manager.
yeah.
Yes.
Movement of some families into the district perhaps in the near future, and what kind of plan we have for dealing with an influx of, I don't know how many students.
Could be many.
And in line with that, the enrollment numbers, how we're doing in terms of enrollment.
Yeah, in particular,
Which
I'm
I've
interested in
heard is-
kindergarten.
It's pretty large.
From Paul, you said? I didn't see that.
I've been watching those.
Just an update from what he gave us earlier, but they definitely seem like, before it was, they might do this, and now they're gonna, sounds like they're gonna
Going
do
to do
this.
it.
They're gonna move some families from one place to another, so new families can move into.
There's another family coming in with like 8 kids too. I don't know if it's the same family.
Well, it was taking individuals out of one place and moving them somewhere else so they could put families
Yes.
in the
from
other
Best
one.
Western
You're
to,
taking the families, the homeless families, moving them to the Holiday Inn, and the homeless, not families.
Individuals.
To the Holiday Inn, and Best Western will be the place the state uses
For the
for families, the homeless families. The other, I think that that's really important, that we look at that. The other announcement I saw was something that's happening, I believe, is it in Tewksbury? Where the state is going to be using a hotel that was no longer in use there.
It's
and
not the
converting
state,
it to
though.
housing.
Tewksbury is simply going to approve for a developer
To do it.
to convert a
Yes.
Marriott into actual rentable apartments. But
That's
there'd be many of them at the low-income level, so
Right.
that might be something, would that be coming down?
Yeah,
to
so-
any of our local hotels, right?
Exactly.
Anything else?
yeah, just a couple of things, just for the next meeting, just get an update on the capital projects that went on this summer at the middle schools and high school. Update on how the transition is going for the new middle schools. You know, kids getting ready to start that up. At some point, hopefully in the next meeting or two, just to get the safety audit results. I know we've been waiting on that, just to see where that's going.
Yeah.
That's it, that's all I have.
Also, maybe at that point, we'll also know about whether or not, what the lunch status is.
Oh, yes.
Get an update on that.
Probably at that point.
And if we could get a transportation update too, at that point, hopefully, Joanna, people will have, everybody will just figure out what we,
I
We'll have registered.
So she's probably already ready
You
for
have a
you.
figure?
Yeah, she probably is.
As of today, 2,820 students have registered to ride the bus. So
That's a little lower, right, than this
I
time?
have hope that the remaining 600 families will register this week. Be wonderful.
August hits people.
Please
like-
register, whether you're
would be
paying
nice.
or not paying, please register.
Yes, it will be better for everybody.
If you, yep, if you
And maybe we can get
plan
an
to
update.
ride the bus, we need to know about you, please register.
And especially given that we have this whole thing happening at the middle school this year, it would be nice to in advance know what's happening and being able to plan, right? So families, please do it.
And then the only other thing that I have is please make sure that you get me your information on the superintendent evaluation, please.
August 4th.
All right, I don't believe we have any other public comment for tonight. Okay, any emails from anybody? Okay. Then with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
I second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
5-0. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.